On this railway adventure, Switzerland's first electric railway and rail cars that carry rail cars on the Luzern-Stans-Engelberg Railway. Hi, I'm Bernie Coppell. Just up the tracks, grades so steep you can't stand up. And what goes up must come down. Join me on Railway Adventures Across Europe. Without the development of the Rickenbach rack, named after its inventor, much of Switzerland's incredible alpine country would be inaccessible by rail. We're about to experience how important that invention is as we climb a grade so steep that passengers are not able to stand. Our adventure begins in the capital city of Luzern. We'll then cross a rolling valley and begin our uphill journey to the ski resort community of Engelberg, high in the Alps. During our travels, we'll learn what mountain railways were like when 3.5 miles an hour was a speedy climb. We'll visit Gallows Chapel, the majestic peaks of the Alps, and the misty mountain village of Engelberg. It's all part of the exhilarating trip on the Luzern-Stans-Engelberg Railway, known as the LSE. All aboard for power to the peaks.
Our railway adventure on Switzerland's Luzern-Stans-Engelberg Railway, known as the LSE, starts in Luzern, which is the capital of the canton or state of Luzern. Our train leaves Luzern and has passed through a mile-long tunnel and over a bridge that crosses an inlet of Lake Luzern. From here, we'll climb through beautiful alpine scenery to Engelberg. This popular mountain ski resort is a summertime favorite for tourists and locals. The introduction of regular passenger boat service to Stansstad in 1958 created a busy but small lakeside port for freight barges and provided the motivation for continuing the railway into Luzern. The LSE is the main transportation link to Engelberg. In extreme winter months, the railway is sometimes the town's only link to the rest of Switzerland and the world. The LSE is a meter gauge rail line, which is slightly narrower track than standard gauge rail lines. It is not unusual to see standard gauge rail cars on meter gauge rail car transporters. You'll also find freight and passenger cars combined on the same train, called a mixed train. Like most other stations on the LSE, you can actually mail a letter at Stansstad through a special slot on the side of the postal car. The letter is sorted between stations along the rail line by the train's postmaster and joins other mail that has been dropped off by the postal service. Another unique characteristic of the LSE is the rack and pinion or cogwheel in the engine. The wheel engages a rack located between the rails to pull the train up steep mountain grades. The cogwheels engage the Rickenbach rack, which was named after the famous Swiss inventor. The incline of the grade changes dramatically from 1 in 20 to the maximum 1 in 4. Perhaps the most dramatic transition that takes place on the LSE railway is in Openlot. Our ride on the rail line will abruptly change from a gently rising valley floor to a steep incline on forest-covered mountains. During the mile-long climb towards Engelberg, the train slows from 45 to 22 miles an hour as it hauls itself up the steep slope. The angle of the climb is incredible, and it's virtually impossible to stand up inside the train on this section of the railway. The steep descent is just as exhilarating. The automatic wheel-static brakes hold the train at an even speed of not more than 7 miles an hour. During the trip, tall pines pass by the window at a very strange angle. Out of the woods for now, our train glides effortlessly alongside the highway towards many of the small towns along the line. The railway provides exciting transportation for visitors and a vital link for area residents and industries. Comfort and speed are definitely modern conveniences when Railway Adventures returns. We're back on Switzerland's mountain climbing Luzern-Stans-Engelberg Railway, the LSE. As we continue our railway adventure across steep Alps and rolling valleys, the road and railway often hug the same small mountainside ledge. The trains of the LSE are all electrified and generally follow a single track between cities, towns, and villages. At most of the stations on the line, there are several tracks side by side, so the precisely scheduled Swiss trains can pass one another and head back to the single track between stations. Switzerland is dotted with small stations to serve the local needs. The modern LSE Railway is known for its significant achievements in the early days of railway travel. Originally named for its route between Stans and Engelberg, the Stans-Engelberg Railway has a unique history and character. Between 1893 and 1903, there was a tramway or trolley between Stanstadt and Stans, which provided service to the first sections of an aerial cable line to the mountain summit of Stanserhorn. It has the honor of being Switzerland's first electric railway and was not quite 2 miles long. This photograph was taken at a place called Gallows Chapel. When the Stanstadt to Engelberg Railway was completed through Stans, it was in direct competition with the tramway. The new railway cars could get up to the amazing speed of 12.5 miles an hour. Luckily for passengers, this strange-looking rail car was actually one of the first freight cars on the railway and had a door on only one side. When the tramway finally closed and business transferred to the new railway, some coaches still remained to serve commuter traffic. In winter, passengers were warmed by a large wood-burning stove. passenger cars began to significantly improve, and travelers could enjoy the comfort of electric heat and the smooth ride delivered by air brakes. There were even first, second, and third class sections, as well as a baggage compartment. Passenger comfort still had a way to go, though, especially when compared to today's modern trains. This imposing station was built in 1929 and can still be seen today, although it is no longer used by the railway. Climbing the same bridge we saw earlier, trains like these were the mainstay of the Engelberg Railway for 4 decades. As early as 1899, the railway was placing orders for additional engines, or motor cars as they were called, exclusively for its tourist traffic to the mountain town of Engelberg. These cars used the earliest known method of air conditioning, since there were no windows. Winter snows often become hazardous for these early little trains that couldn't exactly speed along. They kept a constant speed both up and down the mountain of 3.5 miles per hour. By modern standards, passengers also had a fairly rough time sitting on wooden seats with only light upholstery. This strange-looking little locomotive was used to assist trains over the steep rack section. Even though these power coaches may not have been very comfortable, they were certainly a magnificent piece of workmanship. Until recently, this drawbridge was a famous feature on this section of track. Since automobiles couldn't drive over the rack portions of the railway, the drawbridge raised the road over the rack section. Whenever the trains passed by, the drawbridge had to be operated by hand. So needless to say, the railway management was very pleased to see it go. But this unique structure will long be remembered. In 1973, the modernized Luzern-Stans-Engelberg Railway celebrated its 75th year of operation. More mountain climbing to the peaks when Railway Adventures continues. Our railway adventure on Switzerland's LSE Railway from Luzern continues as we head for the mountain resort of Engelberg. There is a small piece of living history that rests in the garden just across the road from the station in Engelberg. Engine car number 1 dates back to the very beginning of the line in 1898 and was built by the Swiss Locomotive and Machine Works. This little 150 horsepower engine can travel at almost 7 miles per hour on flat land, and then cruise up the side of a mountain at 3.5 miles per hour. Back on our train, we wait for the other train to pass and to pick up our mail. Heading across the countryside, we'll pass cities, towns, and farmland nestled in the mountains. Our train is what's called a push-pull train set, referring to an engine placed at the front and back. Seating is for 150 passengers, as well as standing room for another 85. Up to 3 train sets can be operated at the same time, and today's trains are able to travel at speeds of up to 47 miles per hour in the valley and between 7 and 12 miles per hour on the steep mountain rack sections. The LSE trains are equipped with electro-automatic controls to operate the doors, and all of the cars have a public address system. Stops at the small villages are frequent but short. The rail line follows the valley floor, along rivers and past covered wooden bridges. As our train speeds past the Swiss countryside, melting snow on the mountains forms spectacular waterfalls. On this rainy spring day, the mist clings to the mountains and valleys. The train wanders through beautiful meadows and by rural stations. Breathtaking peaks surround passengers at all sides. Even though the Luzern-Stans-Engelberg Railway is relatively short, the line is continuously being upgraded. Track maintenance is always going on along the line. Upwards to Engelberg, next on Railway Adventures. As we near Engelberg on the Luzern-Stans-Engelberg Railway, our train powers up the peaks of Switzerland's steep Alps. The cogwheels make a steady clickety-clack as we round another bend. We pass under the only road to Engelberg as Switzerland's alpine peaks greet our train. The railway follows the road next to a peaceful high mountain lake on the outskirts of town. The resort town of Engelberg is a mountaineering center and lies almost 3,300 feet above sea level. Engelberg is in a sheltered basin and was developed in 1905 around the Benedictine monastery called Monte Angelorum. The electrically powered Swiss railway system protects the environment and provides accurate and reliable transportation. A hydroelectric power station generates electricity for Luzern and the surrounding area. but has one turbine reserved exclusively for the railway's need. Our adventure started in the bustling city of Luzern, but it has always been the mountains surrounding the ski resort of Engelberg which attracted tourists to the Luzern-Stans-Engelberg Railway. This 15.5-mile rail line also provides essential means of transportation for local people. And in the winter, when snow blocks the road, the LSE is the only way in and out of Engelberg. We leave the misty mountain village of Engelberg for our next railway adventure across Europe.
After climbing the steep mountain grades to Engelberg, the children's story of the little engine that could doesn't seem all that far from reality. We hope you've enjoyed Power to the Peaks. I'm Bernie Coppell. Join me on the next Railway Adventures Across Europe.